right, let's get started today. I am going to be giving the lecture, and it has two parts. The first part is, sort of like a little outline of all these environmental models that are there. So by the end of the lecture, you will have a good idea of what are these models used for, what type of environmental models it is, what's the difference between an air pollution model, climate model, a weather prediction model, a chemical transport model. What are the similarities? What are they used for? What type of problems do they have? So that will be sort of an overview of the tools and the questions that these tools are used to address. And then in the second part, we're going to give a specific sample with results about how to use one of these tools for studying a particular problem. But let me just tell you a couple of things about me. And I know some of you, and I have gotten to know a couple more of you in the audience. But I was born in Nicaragua, and so I know that several of you do quite a bit of international, research. And my background is in chemical engineering, but I sort of am affiliated in mechanical and aerospace here. So the research that I have, because part of the purpose of these seminars is to for you to get to know other people in campus and what are the resources available and who does what and where can you contact. So I wanted to share that these are my sort of two areas of research. One of them, which I call atmospheric sciences, has to do a lot with developing these air pollution models, developing some of fundamental simulations to get chemistry interfaces, developing all these reactions that occur or understanding or codifying the reactions that happen in experimental setups that other colleagues work on. And I am very fortunate to collaborate with them and get to understand the data and put them into models. So this is a very sort of very atmospheric flavor. And then, of course, there is the computational science, which is we really have to make use of the tools and understand that. So that requires many of these models massively parallel computation. It requires the solution of these equations, really some special techniques in numerical analysis. And the issue of sensitivity analysis is because once you have the 200, 300 chemical reactions, you're like, okay, I'm not going to put all that in a model. Can you give me the 2 or 3 that are really important? And then you have several techniques in sensitivity analysis, Monte Carlo analysis, Latin hypercube, that are very well established statistical tools to tell you, oh, these are the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 that are really important. The rest, you can sort of do without if you want to predict that or whatnot. So anyway, this is having talk a little bit about my research background and whatnot. I wanted to sort of open with this picture. So this is right here in Los Angeles, not too far. That's the exit to Pasadena, it seems to read in the upper right. And it shows that this issue of pollution in the South Coast Air Basin of California, it's certainly not a new problem. Look at that. Look at all the automobiles and traffic. It's certainly nothing that it's a very recent problem. And smoke is certainly not a recent problem either. This is a little picture that was taken from an airplane in the Los Angeles basin, and this layer that you see, it's called the inversion layer, all the photochemical smoke, and on a summer day, it's clearly visible, sort of like a line horizontal line that's drawn in the atmosphere, where you can, if you have landed in LAX at some points during the summertime in the right conditions, you will see this inversion layer sometimes with your own eye. So that sort of really motivates the study of air pollution. But in reality, the scientific inquiry about the atmosphere goes way back, and like with many things, we can even go back to Aristoteles, and he wrote in a treatise called Meteorologia that he said, well, air, that's a fundamental body. That really, you cannot break it down in the same way that we have fire and water and earth. You know, that's one of the four fundamental bodies that make up everything else. And if you combine them in different proportions, you get other stuff. So if you combine water and fire, you get steam. And if you combine all these things, you get all these things. But to him, at that time, and to the understanding of the academics, air was as fundamental as it gets. You cannot break it down; it's not made up of anything. So then the science, about 2,000 years, took to really make a small step. And there are some people like Robert Boyle from Boyle's Law that he said, I don't agree with all these, ideas that it's a fundamental thing. And he thinks that it's an aggregate of effluvium. That means a mixture of things. So there was some suspicion that air, it's not as fundamental as we were, thought to believe. And of course, a few years later, we knew about some elements and nitrogen and oxygen. And these Humphrey David say, yeah, of course it is, and we know that it's nitrogen and oxygen. But you know what? This is not an aggregate of effluviums. It's N15O4. Because it's like if you take water and if you take oil and you put it there, it will separate. And if you have nitrogen and if you have oxygen, all this difference in density, it will clearly separate. So there you have it. It's N15O4. What for David was missing, of course, was the importance of turbulent mixing. A very important process, and that is, of course, you can have the oil, you have the water, but if you're constantly shaking it, that will keep the mixture from separating. And this turbulent mixing, it's a very strong force. Actually, when you're flying, you feel the turbulence, and there's quite a bit of mixing in the vertical direction in the atmosphere. So it really started here with Cavendish, the understanding of the composition of the atmosphere. A very, very shy, very shy man. I think that this is one of the two drawings that we have of him, but he was a fantastic experimentalist. He paid attention to the greatest details, and you probably are familiar with at least a couple of his experiments. But today we're going to focus on this one, in which he tried to find out the composition of air. And he was, in fact, able to get nitrogen, oxygen, and even argon. And there is a little bit more, he said, that we know that's CO2. So these, if you do the addition, you say 99.9, that seems to be good enough for government work. We know 99.99 of the atmosphere, we're done. problem solved. Let's close the book. It took from 300 BC to 1800, done. Well, it looks like that, but that other component has proven to be very, very influential in the atmosphere. Those other components which are present in trace, very, very, very small amounts, they have a significant impact on health, on climate, on the chemistry of the atmosphere. Some of these particles have incredibly efficient chemistry, and they act as a chemical reactor that does many things that the gas phase does not do. So these other compounds that are not here, while they are small in composition, they are in the order of parts per million, part per billion, and some of them even part per trillion. That does not mean that they are small in importance. And to me, this is a very personal analogy. It reminds me a little bit of the theory of germs. When it was beginning to discover cholera, Louis Pasteur, and whatnot. Suddenly all these scientists started to say, well, the reason that there is disease is because there is infection, and these are some microorganisms which are tiny. You have to use a microscope, but when they get to you, they cause all sorts of disease, which is something that we understand incredibly clear today. There's not even a discussion. But at that time, people were like, what? Those little things, killing me? It's like I cannot even see them with the naked eye. I have to, yeah, he said, indeed, that's the case. And that's why you need to wash your hands before you help a woman give birth. And some of the academic community were appalled by that. Like, what do you mean wash my hands? Do you want me to sing and dance and do all other rituals too? Well, those are for witches or something. I can do those things. So that it's, the amount or the size of those things sort of is misleading for the effects that they can have. And that's the analogy, the amount that we don't account in the other amount, 100 minus 99.99, that we should not sort of be caught off guard by misunderstanding how important they can be. So this is to understand the dynamics of these things. This is where air quality models come into play. And there are several sort of motivation for that. The motivation, of course, is that if you want to develop a new power plant someplace, you want to ask the question, who will be affected at what times, when, if there is a proposed legislation of new fuels or whatnot, you want to, of course, do the engineering analysis, the economic analysis, but also the air quality analysis, and say how much will this help, and is it worth it from the atmospheric chemistry point of view. So these are typical questions that an air quality model can help you address. And we are here in Los Angeles. I have collected several of these. And this is a report, or basically by the American Lung Association, that it comes every year. And this in particular one is in 2007. I have, I think that for the last 10 years, I have. The last one that came out is 2009. And, but, it always seems that we fight with Houston to see who is in the worst place, in the very, very last place as far as air quality is concerned. So the association, this is the American Lung Association, found that Los Angeles, Long Beach, Riverside metropolitan area had the worst air based on the 20305 data. And this is not particular to this year, this keeps coming by. So we are beginning to put the pieces together. We sort of motivated that in fact these small trace amounts are important, but not only that, but in the area where we live. And it's certainly one of the places, if not the place, that requires most attention in the United States. So this is not, of course, an issue of the United States, and it's not a new issue here. You have several examples in Belgium and London, as well as in the United States, in which there has been air pollution episodes, very well documented air pollution episodes with very significant health impacts. Probably the most famous one is the London 1952. That's a very, very famous. But that was an episode related to sulfates and particles, and which, as we will see here in Southern California, we have nitrates, and so it's a different flavor, so to speak. So these are the usual characters of the dynamics of air pollution that are actually quite important. We have the ozone that was basically formed as a secondary pollutant from the chemistry of volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxide. So it's not directly emitting, but it's a very good gauge because it is formed from other things that you are emitted. Those are the ones that are emitted are the so-called primary compounds. The ones that are formed in the atmosphere are secondary. So actually ozone is emitted very, very little, if any, but it sort of measure what other primary pollutants were emitted. And of course, we talk about NOx and VOCs. The NOx are basically coming from combustion that NO2 to nitric acid. To once you get nitric acid and ammonia, forms ammonium nitrate, and you go to the particle phase, and the oxidation state keeps going on. And then, of course, we also have VOCs, which stands for volatile organic compounds. You may also hear about ROGs, reactive organic gases, or non-methane hydrocarbons. It's very similar, all of them, almost equivalent, maybe. All these 5 or 6, they have a little difference. For example, non-methane hydrocarbons is everything with hydrocarbon and hydrogen and carbon, but methane. So there is some little small difference, but overall you can say that these come also from combustion and solvents and all the other industrial processes. And of course we have not only gases, but particulate matter. And the subscript of this particulate matter, they call it PM10 or PM2.5. That basically is for about the size of the particles in microns. So anything that's PM2.5, it's big particles. The PM particulate matter of 10, and that's 10 micrometers. So this is like road dust, mineral dust, agriculture, big particles. These are basically coming from mechanical processes. And then you have PM2.5, which are smaller particles, less than 2.5 microgram, but those are the ones that get to the lungs. And they usually tend to originate from chemical processes as opposed to mechanical processes. So just to give you a very, very quick overview here, this is the map of the United States with the areas where there is a PM issue, and that in red is the largest concentration, in yellow medium concentration, and in green there's some that it sort of fly, but certainly we have a lot of PM in the two coasts. And if we ask the question, what's that made of? And then we have that in the East Coast. In the East Coast, there is a lot of yellow that you see. All this is basically sulfate, and here in the West Coast, there is quite a bit of red, and that red is nitrate. So this is interesting because if you have to generate policy or strategies at the federal level, you have to generate like a single strategy, but this is more challenging because the PM is made up of different proportions and different entities, and of course not only nitrate and sulfates, but there is a lot of organics that we are beginning to understand the role of organics. There are still so many questions that are unanswered, and certainly very, very complex system. So that is certainly work in progress. All the understanding of all the components of this atmospheric aerosol. So why do we care? Well, for this audience, I don't need to spend too much time on that. But certainly, let's start with visibility, human health, and climate. Those are three very compelling reasons why we care about this amount of pollutants in the atmosphere. This is a picture of Los Angeles. It's not Photoshop. And look at that, how gray and the visibility was. You cannot see the mountains and whatnot. Human health. This is a picture of a human lung, healthy human lung. And this is an extreme case of high concentrations of particles of somebody that inhale a lot of particles from cigarette smoke. And this is a sunset here in Laguna Beach. And it's a beautiful sunset, and sadly the beauty of that sunset and those colors come from the interaction of light and particles. So yeah, you can say that air pollution is a cause of beautiful sunset, but more importantly and quite seriously, these particles also interact with climate in various ways, in a direct and indirect way, that have really the forcing on the overall climate dynamics of the planet. So let's start with taking the big picture. So this is a photograph of an aerosol. This is actually a beautiful photograph. This is one of the first time that aerosol was photographed in 3 dimensions. Usually what you do is to take the aerosol, you slide it into some sort of surface, put it into the microscope, and you see a squash aerosol. But this is actually while it's flowing. This is, really high-tech photography, very exciting. So while it's flowing, you're taking pictures at different angles. So I was very excited when I saw that. It's a couple of years old picture. But anyway, these are, some sources of aerosol. Then we have on the upper part natural sources like volcanoes, and in the lower part we have anthropogenic sources like refineries. And of course, we mentioned about the issues of air pollution, visibility, and climate that are basically obtained from these particles. So, and the interaction of these with the light direct and indirect effect, really has, an overall impact on this. So what I sort of want to conclude is that if we really want to take the futures into our own hands, we really have to go back to understand the science and the fundamentals of where all this originated, and it's really trying to understand the chemistry and the physics of this particle. And this is a very famous graph that you've probably seen several dozen times. But the point that I want to emphasize is so this is the level of understanding that we have, something that we understand very much, and something that we sort of kind of know, and something that we really have a very low understanding. And of course, there's the greenhouse gases, very well characterized, and these we have here UCI Nobel Prize winners that have done that work. But look at this. Look at these error bars. The aerosol indirect effect. It's really a huge error bars. Or look at this, the mineral dust. We're really not sure if it's up for warming or lower for cooling. So all these aerosols and cloud are certainly in the very low level of scientific understanding. And as a scientist, that's a good place to be. It's a good place to explore. Especially as a young scientist, there's a lot of questions that you can contribute to the field, and this is really an ongoing, very active area of research where there's a lot of questions and opportunities that can arise. So let's really start talking about modeling. So what do we have to model? Well, we have to model the atmosphere. Okay, and what's happening in the atmosphere? Well, here we have gas phase stuff that comes from emissions from industry, and it comes from natural emissions like volcanoes or some biogenic compounds, very important, or emissions from the ocean, all in the gas phase, that they can react in the gas phase and they are deposited. So all this chemistry needs to be taken care of. But in addition to that, in the right-hand side, we'll have also particles. So we have particles that come from fires and particles that come from the ocean. All that sea breeze, ocean smell that you get when you walk near the ocean, that's sea salt, and dust and diesels. So you have all these emissions, you have all these gases, and then these particles can take up water. These particles can collide to create bigger particles, and then there might be some chemistry at the surface of these particles that doesn't take place in the gas phase, and it doesn't take place in the bulk, but only in the interface. And of course, there's mass exchange between the gas phase and the particle phase, condensing or evaporating, depending on the temperature and composition, relative humidity, and many factors. And this, can grow, and these particles can activate and form clouds. And there's aqueous phase chemistry inside the cloud, and there's the formation of new particles via a process called nucleation, very hard to understand, and that given the right relative humidity, the right temperature, suddenly you have a burst of particle formation, and then these particles from the cloud can resuspend. So this is what we have to model. There is a very rich set of physics and chemistry. Where do we even start? Some of the Ph.D. That we have had several in the last few years, they spend their whole Ph.D. career studying this point in the graph. There is quite a bit of effort for that. So that's fine. We have to start someplace. And this is a little bit of a sketch of the evolution of air quality models. And if I have to roughly mention some dates associated with that, this is the first part that got developed. This is the gas phase chemistry. So gas phase was probably done in the 1970s and early 80s. And that was basically the developing of chemical mechanisms and the developing of all the numerical, computational infrastructure, chemistry and physics that really formed the gas phase. So you had NOx and VOCs and everything that was not particles. So in the late 80s and 90s, there was a lot of work in the development of aerosols modules to be coupled and incorporated to air quality model, and that was a significant effort. Basically, it takes about 500 times more computational muscle to get to get the aerosol dynamics right than just getting the gas phase dynamics. 500. It's a big number. So it's not twice the work. It's not 10 times the work. It's not 100 times the work. It's 500 times the work. And that's when parallel supercomputers sort of came into to the rescue. And thank goodness, there was quite a bit of development in that area of engineering, of computer engineering, to get the tools right for us to use. And now, of course, there is the aqueous phase that basically we're beginning to. There's a lot of aqueous phase chemistry that's well known, but the coupling of this is the sort of the more recent step in the development that has sort of beginning to take over the last the real coupling of these things in the more recent time. So okay, let's continue our design of our quality models and say which are the main characters here. What are really some of these issues that I have to follow? Well, and these are probably the main characters that you need to care. And some of these is, well, let's start with the ones that we already introduced, the nitrates. Very important here, this path, especially in the Southern California. You have NO going to NO2, going to nitric acid, and the ammonia, ammonium nitrate. Or the sulfates, very important, especially in the west coast of the United States. You have all the SOx, sulfuric acid, to ammonium sulfates and other items that go with the ammonia with sulfate and nitrate, and of course you have plenty of water. Yeah.
How come the two different coasts have the different high concentrations of either the SO or the NO?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That's a very, very good question. And the reason for that is that the energy production in the West Coast, there has a lot of power plants that use coal that has some sulfur components. Here in California, we have very strict regulations for sulfate, and actually extremely strict, and there can be no sulfate, and that really puts the limit on that. Of course, there is other issues, and one of the issues is that there is a lot of cattle waste and farming and whatnot. So there is a lot of ammonia emissions in the area near Chino, near Riverside. If you have traveled, you don't even need to have a mass spectrometer, but you will smell it immediately. And then you have downwind from that, or I should say upwind, so that it's blowing into the Chino area, and those, farm racing, you have all the emissions that come from the 405, the 5, the 1, all these major freeways that are emitting NOx. And once they see the ammonia, that basically creates ammonium nitrate and creates that. So two very, very, very different sources, cattle, energy production, two very, very different chemistry, and at the end, you have the particles, so they are totally different. Great question. Yes?
Why are sulfates regulated so much in California, but nitrates aren't as much?
Sulfates are easier to regulate. It's sort of you know, if you start regulating ammonia, you have to, you know, this is basically cattle raising. These are farmers. So that from a policy point of view, you know, that it's you can imagine it's more sensitive to tell a farmer don't, you know, get your cows than to tell a oil company get your sulfur. So certainly I'm not a policy expert, but I can see where that, you know, it's where those issues are coming into place. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. So let's take a closer look at the particles, and I don't want to really go over details, but there is a really rich set of physics and chemistry going on here. There is, you know, once you have the gas phase, there is of course an interface where the reactions can occur. There is aqueous phase over here. You have primary or secondary components. You have sea salt. You have salt phase going and reacting, and of course you have all these elemental carbon and organic carbon and other chemistry that's going on. So now we can see, oh, okay, I begin to see why it's 500 times more expensive to do all the chemistry here. So on top of that, that's only the chemistry part. You have to worry about a whole bunch of other processes. You have to get your emissions right, and there's people who spend their life doing emissions inventories. Tell me what is emitted, where, at what time, what size, is it gas phase, is it particle phase? Those emissions inventories are anything but trivial to develop. You have, of course, the position, wet and dry deposition, how things, you know, basically come to the ground, condensation and evaporation, the mass transfer between the gas phase and the particle phase, advection, that has to do with the way that pollutants are moved from, say, the coast to inland from the wind. And you have the turbulent diffusion, very important. Humphrey Davy would be happy that we got that shaking going on. That has to do with basically that was the vertical motion that he missed when he said that air is in 1504 or something like that. And you have coagulation and nucleation. So our task is basically to get all this chemistry that we saw in the previous slide, to get all these processes that we have and start writing some code to develop a model for that. So these models are used for very local pollution effects, but in addition, here we have a beautiful picture of that occurred in October of 2003. These are the fires. This is the coast of California here, and these are the red dots where the fires occurred. And look at that. Here the wind is blowing into the ocean. This is not the common conditions, meteorological conditions. This is a different set of meteorology that's going on. They're known as Santa Ana conditions, when the flow reverses and you have more dry air and hotter, and that of course is sort of what's promoting fire. So these are the air quality models, you know, can tell you ahead of time, you know, if there is a fire, you know, in different places, who is going to be affected and by how much. So it not only helps you with air quality planning and legislation, but it also helps you with, you know, if there is a volcano erupting in some place, if there is a fire in some place, or in national security, you know, if there is some bioactive aerosol dispersed at a given place, where is it going to go, and helps you find evacuation routes and planning ahead and whatnot. So very useful for that purpose. But that's not the only environmental atmospheric model out there. There is also all these numerical weather prediction models, regional models, chemical transport models. So all this. So let's have a little tour about these different models. So so that when you interact with all the modelers, you have a better perspective of what is it that they are doing. So numerical weather prediction, it answers a different question. The question that it answers is it going to rain tomorrow? If you want to know the answer to that question, that's a numerical weather prediction, how hot it's going to be, and it has tremendous amounts of importance, not only for the prediction of hurricanes, but it also has importance for the production of energy. If you are in the business of distributing energy, you want to find out how hot it's going to be the next day, because that will tell you how many air conditionings are going to happen. A few days ago, some of us in University Hill had a major blackout, one of the transformers, when it was very hot. Everybody's AC was on, and it couldn't handle the grid, so we had a blackout on that. So you might also want to ask the question: is there going to be a sandstorm in Iraq? What are the winds going to be? All these questions basically come from a numerical weather prediction. It's basically when you're solving, it's a momentum model. And it will give you temperatures, it will give you winds. And that is really significant help. So now we have a different question. And the question is, okay, let me try to see what is not the weather, the specific weather, but the climate, sort of like a more average quantity going to be 100 years from now. So that's a totally different model that we need. You don't need all the details and all the very fine resolution of a numerical weather prediction model, which, depending, it's only a few days accurate. There's a lot of issues related to sensitivity analysis and chaos and initial condition dependence. Maybe you heard about the butterflies effect, and that basically started with Edward Lorenz at MIT, who started understanding whether that the initial conditions are so important that after some time the accuracy in the numbers that you use here really show in a highly magnified way. So after a few days, that they sort of break down. And certainly after 100 years, then you have to do something else. You have to take into account other averages and whatnot. And this is basically what climate models intend to do. They try to predict how the overall climate is going to move, and there are many different versions floating around, and some of them have different physics and different chemistry, and then of course they have different predictions. But this is a very nice graph that shows some of the projected all the projections of all the different climate models, starting in the 2010s and sort of moving forward, and they vary all over the place. But what is clear, even the most conservative ones, even the lowest one possible, they all show and continue increase in temperature. And some of them, the increase in temperature is rather marked. According to IPCC, these are the ones that seem to be right someplace in the middle. And but certainly none of them it's are showing that. So all this is very, very important research that has come out of a variety of groups and hundreds of PhD years of really the brightest minds in atmospheric sciences that been developing these tools. So now we have a different kind of question. So I'm not interested in 100 years. I'm interested in some processes that are a couple of years. You know, I am interested in finding out, you know, transport from the deserts in China to California, or transport from emissions in the East Coast that go to Europe, or I'm going to be asking, you know, what's the distribution of sulfates in the northern hemisphere. So all these processes that have a few months in time scale. So this is where a CTM is used. CTM stands for a chemical transport model, and that sort of has a lot more detailed chemistry than a climate model. You can afford that with today's computers, but in order to do that, you have to give up, you know, something, and that what you give is the fact that you cannot go in time, 100 years, 1,000 years. You have to go, you know, a few years in time. So that decision when you are developing your model, if you go that route, basically that's what makes a CPM. And in those boxes, you are allowed, now that you are integrating less in the time direction, you are allowed to put more chemistry going on, and that will give you a little bit of a flavor of, say, what is the distribution of sulfates in the world, and one of famous results that came out from the CTM community is that, of course, the northern hemisphere shows the highest values of sulfates, and you can see the distributions and animations and things like that. So I like to, you know, provide different examples of some of the classical, very classical research results that came from each of these guys. And here you see that the particle distribution in the northern hemisphere. Look at that. This is in the continent, and the larger particles, all the oranges and whatnot, this is basically coming from dust. So this is mechanical sources, dust and whatnot, and these are chemical sources. And then you see, and then here in this coarse mode, the high concentrations are really over the deserts. And so this type of work, it's by a chemical transport model. So right now, then, we have our work cut out for us. We're going to concentrate, now that we have seen all the different, you know, the background and whatnot and the different flavors. So I will concentrate in an air quality model. So this is trying to get a few days. This is a smaller region, say Southern California, and but this is really intense chemistry. You're really putting not tens of reactions, but you're putting hundreds of reactions, and high resolution. So these are the governing equations. So what we have to do is basically convert all these things that we talked about before, all these processes, all these advections and whatnot, and translate it into a mathematical form. So all the mechanical engineers, all the fluid mechanicians, all the chemical engineers, this is advection terms, and this is the diffusion term that we talk about with Humphrey Davy, that K is the mixing that occurs. So, and of course, this is very involved fluid dynamics, and we're not going to the details on that, but I want to sort of take you through the whole process of the development of these things, and we're just saying we write the equations. Well, that's easier said than done, but that was part of the process. And once the equations are written, how do you solve them? That is also not a trivial exercise. Some of my colleagues in economics say, so what's the problem? You guys know the equations. You have the equations. What's the problem? Well, The fact that we know the equations doesn't mean we know the solutions of the equation. Oh, he said in economics sometimes we don't even know the equations. So that's a different perspective. But yes, we do know the equations, and that's nice. But as you can see, these equations are non-linear, heavily coupled, and rather challenging to solve. So we implement them into a Eulerian framework in Los Angeles, and that's the example that I'm picking. And that will basically generate a grid over the area that we model. This is, you probably recognize the San Gabriel Mountains, very flat here. This is Long Beach, and almost like a textbook example. All the winds generally come from inland. The mountains stop it. We have nice weather. Photochemistry kicks in. All the emissions from the major freeway. So this is pretty much a nice recipe for pollution. And now we incorporate that framework into a three-dimensional grid and solve it into a parallel supercomputer. And then our work has barely started, because we have to get all the input that goes into this, but we don't even try to predict temperatures and winds and whatnot. It's like, please give it to me, and then the model will use that as an input and try to do the chemistry and the mixing and the transport to do its prediction. But I want to, just like experimentalists, I want to share with you something that I'm very passionate about, and that is the tools that we have to use to solve this. And these have to be solved in really high-end supercomputers. So I will take you for the next 5 minutes in a very nice tour of the history of parallel computers. And this is 1975, the ELIAC 4, 256 nodes. If it looks familiar, it's because you might have seen HAL in a movie by Arthur Clarke and, in 2010, and that was the movie set of that HAL machine that appeared in the movie was inspired by the ELIAC 4. So it was $31 million, and it has 16 megs memory. I don't think that any of you have a phone right now with 16 megs memory. You probably have one with several gigabytes of memory. So that is, in fact, each of these circuits represented a different centralized processing unit. So this is a machine that's very, very close to my heart, because I did my Ph.D. work on it. This is the Intel Touchstone Delta, and it was brought in Caltech. It has also 512 processors, so it was in the hundreds of processors, and that was based on this processor IA60 Intel by Chuck Seitz. Did a lot of work on this, and it really made a quantum leap in what's so-called Moore's law. It really pushed computing very far. And at that time, I was like yourself, trying to find what is a good project, what's something exciting, what's new. And when this new toy came, I was like, I want to use this. I want to play with this to, do my research, and it proved to be, a lot of fun and a lot of. So this was my thinking at that time, and I encourage you to find out what are some of the exciting things around, so that you can sort of leverage that to your research. So in the other side of the United States, in another good school in Boston, MIT, they had a different approach. They said, well, instead of using hundreds of processors, we're going to be using tens of thousands of processors that are a little bit less powerful, but that's okay. We have tens of thousands of them. So, we'll proceed with that. And this is the Connection Machine 5. I tried to program it, and it was a nightmare. And you can imagine, if you need to move, or you need any task done, maybe you ask 5 or 6 friends, and you'll move faster than by yourself. But imagine if you need to move and you ask 65,000 of your friends. It will take even longer. You're familiar with 65,000 friends. It's like, no, that's just, you cannot divide the problem or all the problems. There are some other problems that are easier for this type of architecture, but not all of them. So, and this was not clear at the time. There was a lot of research going on. Early 90s, some of the people in Switzerland, they started talking maybe a little bit too early about this idea that actually it's catching on right now, 20 years later. But they said, very, very insightful at that time, let's not go with 65,000, let's not even go with 500 or 200, let's go with 8. Let's go with really powerful microprocessors, and then we can. This is called the Giga Blaster at that time, and let's go for that. Well, it was a little bit too early. The idea was a right idea, but the timing was not right. As you know, today probably some of your desktops are like quads or double processor, 4 processors or 8 processor, which is this, which was there 20 years ago, but it was just not ripe enough. It was not the right time. And so I came to UCI as an assistant professor, and with my very good friend Herbert Hamber in physics, we started putting clusters together. And these were clusters that you buy off the shelves, and price and whatnot. And we put all these. There were 10 of them, and we got all these at the time. The best processor, 300 megahertz. Look at that, with 128 megabytes, and it was working very nice. And we got a few more, and we really had to stretch the dollar amount. This is what professors in their first year, assistant professor do. We talk with the money and the grant. So everything was free in the sense of compilers and whatnot. It's GNU or it was donated, and even the racks. This is a rack that was on sale at Home Depot. Everything really stretching the dollars, but we grew to 16 processors, and I was doing my air pollution simulations. He was doing some cosmological things about the order of the universe, I'm not sure. And then we got sophisticated with the network. This is, of course, very important to have all the machines talk to each other, but this is a very nice switching, which was 100 megabytes per second, and given the time, this was really, I was so proud of this architecture, and the fact is that I really miss having the Delta supercomputer, and I wanted to have something like that to continue doing my research. So I was very motivated, but this really exemplified the fact that if you want to run this thing, you have to really push the envelope. So we grew to 128, and the LA Times got a hold of the story, and there's our 5 minutes of fame is that at that time the cost per amount of computation was really low. So we even got to the news. This is what when they say that ingenuity. What is it? It's the mother. Necessity is the mother of ingenuity, something like that. As a poor professor, you really have to come up with clever ways to get your work done. Today, we still that machine doesn't exist because we upgrade it every few years. But this is actually a working parallel computer that we have, which is the sort of evolution of that machine that was called ESS. This was called MPC, which stands for Medium Performance Cluster, and we are in the order of hundreds. So all these are the processing units. We'll call them pizza boxes, and each one of them has 4 processors, and these are the hard disk, and this is the network over here. It's a lot less, less spread out, and and this was in 2006. The infrastructure is still there, but we just keep upgrading every 3 or 4 years or whatnot. Last year, I was in Barcelona, at the Barcelona Supercomputer Center, and doing some environmental computation for Europe, and this is like a kid in a candy store. It was a fantastic experience. This is one of the fastest supercomputers in the world, in the free world. There are faster ones, but they are used for things that are nuclear bomb simulations and things that they don't let anybody touch so easily. But this is in the pre-academic world. It was located in the consecrated church, which I think that was kind of nice because you have the contrast between the ultra-modern and the Romanesque architecture and whatnot. And over here, where the altar used to be, there is the main brain of the machine, and this is on the order of 94 teraflops. So what does that mean? Just to give you an idea, that means that if you say Mare Nostrum, that's the name of the computer, which the Roman calls the Mediterranean Sea. In Latin, it means our sea. You say Mare Nostrum, why don't you count all the stars in the universe for me? Return. But a second and a half later, it will say, I'm done. That is the power of 94 teraflops. It's unbelievable amount of power. So I was like, I'm going there for 3.5 months to try to get some time on that, and we got some really, really exciting results that are coming out. So I also wanted to give you a flavor of the tools. All the experimentalists, they always show you their mass spectrometers and their flights and whatnot. So as computational, we have to also share some of the tools that we use, which I find, equally exciting also and whatnot. So let me start the conclusion of the first part, which doesn't, was more an overview before we go to the second part where we really have some specific results. But what we have done so far is talk about the different models, motivate that the study of what's in the atmospheres in the last 2,000 years has been in the minds of academics and why, motivate sort of the sketch of what you need to create an air quality model, and give a 5-minute history of the computational tools of the last quarter century or so that are needed to run this model. But are they effective? Are they working? Are they providing enough input to policymakers? Is the input making a difference? Well, those are important questions. Actually, that's probably one of the most important questions. So let's take a look. These are some of the growth that is in population, that's the number of people. Gross state product, that's economics. And total vehicles miles traveled, that's transportation. So certainly it has grown, and it's expected to continue to be growing. Okay, nothing new, everybody knows this. The question is, fine, what is happening to the economy and the population is increasing and the big miles are increasing, what's happening to the emissions? So most of the emissions of nitrogen oxides, sulfate oxides, and decreasing. Maybe CO2 is the one that it's not. But I think that that's rather remarkable that given all the other curves, I would have, if I was not in the business, if I didn't know anything about that, I would have never predicted this decrease based on only showing the trends of growth in the other items. So, well, what's happening in the PM world? Well, this is the state standard over here, and it's moving all over the place. In the last few years, it's certainly decreasing, whether it's in the San Joaquin Valley or here in the South Coast. So there is certainly a large decrease in the last couple of decades, but nothing, certainly in the right direction, but nothing extraordinary as it is here in the ozone frame. I think that this is really extraordinary, the amount of progress that we have been doing. So if you look in the last 30 years, it has decreased enormously. I think that this is one of the greatest success stories that US EPA and ARP have to tell. I mean, look at the data, and if you have older friends or relatives that live here in the 70s, I talked to some of those people. They say that as children they used to go out and they would literally tear because of all the pan peroxylacetyl nitrate that was out there. Really nasty air quality. So are we there yet? No, we are not. I mean, there is still a ways to go, but certainly there is no matter how you look at it, whether you look at it as a number of stage 1 episode or stage 2, and these are defined by given levels in ozone, or whether you look at the number of data above the standard, all the norms are showing that over the last 50 years there is a steady but significant improvement. And many of these things come from understanding that it's originated in air quality models, and we can talk about some of this in details, but whether there is the catalytic converter or regulating something or other, there has been a lot of actions that are implemented throughout the years that sort of get inspired by having a good engineering and scientific understanding. And then, of course, this is the maximum ozone. Yeah, it goes oscillates, but overall the trend, it's really extraordinary. I think. And of course, if we go to some other compounds, we're doing very, very well in NOx and sulfur. But if it's in PM, we mentioned that that we still have some work to do. And right now in air toxins, other toxins, we really have the work out. So are we fine in ozone? No, we are moving in the right direction, but we still have long ways to go still. But better than the alternative, which is moving in the other direction. So with that, I want to sort of remember where we started and taking a look at this photograph, this historical photograph. And from time to time, you go outside and you have your camera with you. And it's not every day, but once in a while you go outside and you get like a really, really nice day. So it makes you feel very, very good. So with that, I just wanted to thank you for your attention for the larger first part, and we can open the floor for any questions.
So you have the models.
All right, welcome to the part 2, in which we are actually going to take a look at an application of an air quality model for future scenarios. So in the part 1, we went in the last 2,000 years of history, starting with Aristoteles and ending up in the year 2000 or so. And here we are going to go forward in history to the year 2050 and study a particular scenario of the population of cars in the United States. So the title is The Impacts of Hydrogen Infrastructure and Fuel Cell Vehicles. So the whole idea and the whole motivation is that there is a complete change in the fuels that we might be using in the next 50 years. There is a paradigm shift also in the transportation sector. And there are many many proposed venues. So is there a silver bullet? No, there isn't. So, but in the energy sector, we are talking about wind, we are talking about solar, we are talking about bio-renewable, and so on and so forth. There is a lot of different new technologies that are sort of being developed and evolving, and we are assessing the benefits of each one of them. In the fuel sector, there is, they talk about liquefied natural gas in the in New York and Pennsylvania. There are some, new discoveries that are making a difference in the direction that we might proceed in the future. And there is, in addition to liquefied natural gas, there is the whole issue of hydrogen. So these are very important questions for our society to address, and this cannot be answered by one individual. They require, of course, a lot of understanding in planning, economics, engineering, atmospheric chemistry, energy systems, transportation, so many areas. And I think that I find this type of things, fascinating. And these are some of the works where we can contribute using air quality models with others who are experts in energy and transportation and computational tools that we've been developing over the last few decades to provide our understanding of that. And one of the computational modules that we have developed is called STREET. STREET stands for the Spatially and Temporally Resolved Energy and Environmental Tool, and it really uses an air quality model, of course, but it uses, in addition to that, it uses other modules about fuel use, the fuel implementation, the transportation, distribution. It uses a little bit of geographical information system. So it is really a multi-modal framework to answer these types of questions that are related to energy infrastructure and environmental impact. So this is our poster where you see the sun and you see the transportation and you see the electricity and the bio and whatnot. So which has been really developed and supported financially by several agencies. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is, in this second part, go through one. We have done hundreds, if not thousands of these, but let's go through one study together. Am I saying that this is the actual truth that this will happen? No. This is one actually hypothetical study that we're going to examine on a step-by-step so that you get a flavor of what is it required to do one of these tasks, and see what type of numbers we get and what type of analysis we get. And this is the South Coast Air Basin of California. The year is 2050. We have three different vehicle technology scenarios. The Ph.D. is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So that means that it uses gasoline and electricity. And the assumption here is that it uses 40 miles of electricity, and after that, the gasoline sort of takes over. Okay, there is also the fuel cell vehicle, which is a purely hydrogen fuel cell, and then there we have the plug-in hybrid, which uses hydrogen, of course, plus electricity. So the first 40 miles, again, just like case one, it's electricity. After you run out of that energy, you switch to hydrogen. And of course, we have a baseline, which is the vehicle fleet that only uses gasoline. So we are going to focus in today's talk mostly on this case. So we are going to assume in our study scenario that we have 100% vehicle penetration. That means all the cars in the South Coast Air Basin by 2050 in our hypothetical studies are fuel cells. And we're going to say, what does that mean? What does that you have fuel cells, and they are not emitting anything. But of course, the question that I always ask is, where does the hydrogen come from? And we are going to have some emission savings from the actual cars, but we have to generate that hydrogen somehow, and we have to generate it in basin, maybe not. We're going to discuss about that. So all this is where we're going. So let's get started. We have to make some assumptions, and this is a rather complex model that we have that I'm just basically sketching here. This is called a fuel cycle analysis model that we have developed. And basically what the model does is, as input, you tell it how much hydrogen you need, and we did the calculation in the previous one, in so many miles, you get so much hydrogen. But once you have identified that, basically you have to get a different percentage of where that hydrogen is coming from. So we need to identify that, whether it's coming from all these sources. It's from the air quality point of view, it's very different if it comes from natural gas than if it comes from coal. The emissions are going to be different. So you have to identify the production path. You have to identify the distribution path, and you have, that is going to be guiding the demand path, where these things, going to be distributed and whatnot. And we have to make those decisions. Once we have that input, we have output for this strict module, we get, basically the greenhouse gas emissions with the energy consumption, criteria pollutants, and water consumption. We're going to focus today on the first three. And given the time, I'm not going to talk about water consumption, even though that's extremely relevant. And I think that there are some other lectures that we'll have in this series that will talk extensively about water. So we really need to get that going. So let's first talk about the greenhouse emissions, and then we'll talk about the other distribution. And again, I can go extensively discussing greenhouse, but let's just put a summary of the greenhouse emissions, even though the focus will really be in air pollutants like ozone and particulate matter. But let's discuss this for a little bit. So this is our baseline case, and this is basically the greenhouse gas emissions in CO2 equivalents. So if we have our business as usual, gasoline only, this is the emissions that are associated with this scenario. And all of them are orange, meaning gasoline. If we go fuel cell, these are the estimated emissions, and we're going to mention where these estimates come from and what assumptions were involved here. They're coming from generation of hydrogen. Certainly there is nothing related to gasoline. There's nothing, hydrogen is not going to create other problems. But in order to generate hydrogen, you do have some greenhouse emission, not the hydrogen consumption itself, but the hydrogen generation. All right, and then we have the hybrid cases, the plug-in hybrid electric and the plug-in hydrogen fuel cell that use 40 miles of electricity, and then they switch. This one switches to gasoline, so that's why you have blue and orange, and this one switches to hydrogen, that's why you have blue and green. So, and the blue is the same in both of them because this is the one associated with the generation of electricity, and it's 40 miles, so that's that. And then here is this one, when it switches to gasoline, it adds this orange, and when it switches to hydrogen, this one adds here. So this is the one that we're going to really focus most of the attention, but I wanted to put the fourth them in perspective as far as greenhouse gases is concerned. Yeah.
Seeing as how we just got through like an election where certain businesses, you know, that were in the oil industry kind of sponsor certain bills, are there certain, you know, if we were as a society to go towards this hydrogen power, would we meet a lot of opposition from oil producers?
I think so. I think so. Imagine the amount of dollars that are part of the revenue of and so many producer refineries, infrastructure, distribution. So this is you know something that I really believe that we'll have to make gradual changes, and there will certainly be with significant, if not heavy, opposition. And I think that once we look at the fact that if we go to hydrogen, we really have to change completely the infrastructure, because it's so different than gasoline distribution. You have to have totally different requirements. So it's really a quantum leap that you have to, in order to compress hydrogen, your gasoline, you don't need to compress it. You just put it in a tank without any compression. Hydrogen, you need the pressure to compressor and special equipment and whatnot. So it requires significant effort, and that on top of the resistance to go, and pretty much it's human nature to resist change. And even though you see this when people's livelihood depend on that, they will, I believe, resist more of that. Yeah.
Are there any oil and gas companies now that are even thinking about looking into fuel cell technology and using hydrogen instead of gas?
All of them. I think that they have seen the writing in the wall, as well as car companies. I don't think that they are, the size of their programs, it's different. Some of them are more interesting and more serious than others. But I mean, think about it. If you were the CEO of Toyota, sure, you would like to continue your business, what you've been doing, but I mean, if you have to think ahead, you have to position your company to start really thinking at these things. And by some of the results that we're going to present today, we can be pretty convinced that this will not be certainly the one silver bullet that answers all the problems, but we cannot ignore the presence of this type of fuels.
So then, how much of the push for research in hydrogen fuel cells and all that is coming from oil and gas companies versus from outside companies that are just focused on fuel cell research, let's say?
I do not know the numbers exactly. I can tell you the numbers from my laboratory, and I do know those numbers. And we do get some small support from Toyota, but most of the support that allows this research comes from government agencies: the California Energy Commission, the California Air Resources Board, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, by far. And we do interact with some of this, but this is just one data point of one professor in one university.
It's not representative.
Yeah.
Okay, just curious.
All right, so let's go to the criteria pollutants and how do we get this? Okay, so this is what we were talking about. We move to hydrogen. And of course, hydrogen is clean when you use it. But the question is not when you use it. The question that will affect the atmosphere, which is our interest, is what about the hydrogen when you produce it? So we have developed two scenarios, just for the sake of our analysis. Does this mean that we are endorsing these scenarios? No, you have to pick something to illustrate tools and techniques that these things can be used for. So anyway, there's a lot of numbers here, but basically this column over here is what we call a scenario R, and this one called a scenario F. What separates them is that a scenario R, it's more renewable sources, and a scenario F, it's more fossil fuel sources. So if you have to pay attention to a couple of lines only, here you see that this scenario has a lot more hydrogen generated from electrolysis, which is pretty much solar, and that's a much bigger number than a scenario F. So both of them has a distribution of several hydrogen generating technologies, but the weight is different. And similarly, this one has a little bit less from coal, hydrogen produced from coal. This is coal gasification. And then this one, this scenario F has a lot more hydrogen that come from that because it's based on fossil fuel. So let's start focusing that we have our sources of hydrogens come from this scenario for the time being. We're going to use a scenario F in a little bit, but let's start with one. Let's start with R for now, and that means that we will have to develop all the emissions that go with that. If we look at from lecture 1, we have the air quality model, we have done that, we have done all the coding, but we need some emissions. And these emissions, they better be a function of space. They better be also a function of time. When it's morning, rush hour, we need all those emissions inventories, and it better also be a function of chemical species. Are you emitting NOx? Are you emitting ammonia? Are you emitting, what is it chemically that you are emitting where and at what time? And if it's aerosol, what size? There's a short aerosol, a big aerosol, and whatnot. So all that needs to be done first. And so let's talk about that. Is how we are going to develop this emissions inventory. So this is Los Angeles. This is the blue lines are the interstate and freeways in the region. These are the county lines, and these are the state lines in gray and whatnot. And what we have to decide is, for the sake of this scenario, start putting some hydrogen fueling stations that are going to be able to meet the 100% demand that we have to study. So in this case, we selected those locations. And these locations were selected based on the several criteria. And of course, they were selected to satisfy the demand. That's very important. And they were also selected in a location where they are close to freeways, and they are in locations where there is a current gasoline gas station. So that with the land use and all those other issues about urban development and whatnot, they are still in place. So that the first decision that we have to make, and then of course we need to have some hydrogen from someplace, and these are the ones in green. We have a location for the central generation of hydrogen. In other words, we are generating that hydrogen here. So you can see a lot of give and take. Before we can say, we'll just, we will just use electricity, but we'll buy all the electricity from Texas or Enron or well, no, maybe not, and Nevada or Arizona or someplace else. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Here we are indeed saving a lot, but for the sake of this study, let's generate the hydrogen here, and we do that. And these are places where existing energy generation, power plant and refineries are. So we have them in the blue. It's SMR, that's steam methane reformation. That's a technique to generate hydrogen that we can convert these refineries in steam methane reformation plants for the sake of our study. And these are, these power plants we're going to convert them from either nuclear or whatever coal to basically renewable energy, hydrogen producing. Okay, so we have that. That will help us get the special and temporally resolved, but we need more information. So we also need the distribution of hydrogen, and this distribution is shown in this red line, and these are existing infrastructure that's used for the transportation of gas, natural gas. So we are saying, okay, let's use those same pipelines for the distribution of hydrogen that's occurring in different places, and then we can sort of bring it to the sort of metropolitan area that way, and that way you don't have to rebuild, all new pipelines or whatnot. So that certainly helps with the distribution a lot, but there is a lot more distribution that has to take place internally. So let's take a little zoom here at the area near Long Beach to see, what some of these details are going to look like, and what we need to show is that there has to be also two things. We need to find out the trucks that are going to distribute the hydrogen, the route of those trucks, and we need to find the local generation of hydrogen. So let's start by putting some distributed energy smaller plants that are generating hydrogen. So as you can see, we're trying to have a whole portfolio of smaller and bigger and medium-sized technologies, and we're going to put them over here when there is already existing industrial land. So this is a geographical information system with color-coded with this sort of dark orange, that where there is industrial, and within that industrial sector we have in a lighter orange the one that's associated with oil and gas today. So in 2050 we say, we're going to select those same locations that are industrial oil and gas, and to select them, and that's why you see the blue dots that way, to select them as locations for regional distribution of hydrogen. And finally, we have this location for the smaller scale local high temperature fuel cells. If you go to some of the hotels or some of the South Coast Plaza or the Hyatt over here, and a few large institutions, they have much smaller fuel cell technologies that are already being used to generate electricity. So these are shown by the yellow dots, and of course there is an algorithm that will help solve that, as well as an algorithm to find out which are the truck delivery routes in green, in such a way that you hit all the gas stations, that you have the roads of the right size and whatnot, as well as that you minimize the number of miles that you have to travel. That there is a lot of beautiful mathematics that are associated with this problem. Given that you have to be in all these places, what's the route that you have to take? It's somewhat analogous to it's very famous in math. It's called the traveling salesman problem, and it's very used in the people in the airline industry. You have to fly to all the cities and what are the itineraries and whatnot. And so there is a lot of math behind this that it's pretty sophisticated, but we can come up with something well thought out and with a lot of mathematical foundation that tells you, these are great places that you should distribute it that way, and that's what's shown in green, so that we hit all the right spots. And after doing all that, we are then able to generate, by knowing what is going on where and at what time, we are able to generate all the emissions files, all this special and temporal distribution of emissions. And then our work has just started. because we haven't even done anything about air quality. So this is really anything but very good. But at least we have those emissions inventories, and that require all the analysis and decisions that we sort of sketched before. And now we're going to take that and to bring it to what we described in the earlier part of part one of the lecture with the air quality simulations. And in other words, what we're doing is moving from the criteria pollutant emissions that we developed for the basin and coupling all that energy, transportation, urban dynamics, and bring them to an air quality grid, a Eulerian three-dimensional grid that we have developed to sort of really make a unique synergy between the different fields, and this is actually the link that's required. So after we have our equations, and without going into the details as we did in the previous lecture with some of these terms, the one that really gets most affecting is this term here that's related to sources and sinks, because it's going to be affected the most by these changes in emissions. And then we let that air quality model sort of do its thing, and we'll get some output. These are just placeholder. This is not the actual output. The actual output is coming up in the next slide. But this is just to illustrate the flow of information that comes from the fuel cycle analysis model, the air quality, the development of the emission inventory, the running of the air quality model, and then finally have some sort of prediction. But let's look at the predictions right now. Let's look at some of the results of this scenario that we are sort of studying. So this is the baseline scenario, which is gasoline only, no changes. And this is our focus study, which is the 100% fuel cell vehicle under all the assumptions that we discussed. And what we're showing here is the absolute ozone in the basin if nothing changes. So we see that places near the beach are sort of on the blue, and as we move inland, the pollutants get pushed in that direction most of the time. A couple of days, a few days, we have Santa Ana conditions where that's not the case, but those are the exceptions, not the rule. And ozone gets to be accumulated near this area, near riverside and whatnot. And this is the prediction of our model, and this is the prediction of most models. Those are the typical dynamics, and those are verified by measurements. Nothing new here, nothing new. What's exciting and what's new in this slide is this side. But this is sort of like check. We're not totally of the wall. But this is the new thing. That says that if the scenario fuel cell vehicle is implemented, we have a benefit of about 8 ppb. So you can begin to quantify the impact of that. And we also feel fortunate, this is nature's very time in this case, because all the biggest benefit occur in the place where you need it the most. So that's kind of nice. That's kind of nice. I felt very excited about this. I shared this this particular scenario with some of the people who work in the transportation industry, and they made a very interesting question. And they say, so what you're saying is that if we change all the cars to fuel cells, at the most places will see very little change. So the cars are not the source of pollution in Los Angeles. Okay, let's examine that statement for a second, because it's easily to get misled. So the statement is, look at that, we change everything to everything to hydrogen, and most of the places you see very little change. So cars are not the source of pollution in most of the. Okay, several things are wrong with that statement. First of all, we didn't change all the cars in Los Angeles. What we did is only change the light duty vehicles. We did not talk about the heavy duty vehicles, including trucks, buses, and whatnot. So that's a big ticket item. Second of all, we didn't reduce any of the transportation in the light duty vehicle. We kept the growth, and we assume actually a significant growth for about 14 million, the number of cars and vehicles miles, all that it was, taken care of. So there was no reduction in vehicles, zero reduction in vehicles. That's number two. And number three, what we did also is to incorporate some. Not only we clean it because of the cars are cleaner, but we also incorporated a lot of emissions to generate that hydrogen. So that's point number three, that sort of weakens this argument. If we were to remove completely, or say 50%, the fleet of cars, that would have shown a much more drastic change. So, but we didn't want to go there. We wanted to be as, relaxed as possible to, take care of keeping everybody with a car and not adjusting anything in the heavy duty. This was our scenario. So, which was a pretty soft scenario. We didn't want to go for a major. Of course, we can, and the model can do that, and we have done that. We have done 100 simulations. But I thought that it was very interesting to see how this comment came about. So I have to be careful with that. So let's look at PM. What happens in PM in our scenario? Well, here is the baseline scenario. These are absolute particulate matter changes, and we see that there are two major peaks here in Southern California, and these peaks we sort of talked a little bit briefly. That has to do with, in the previous lecture, it has to do with nitrate dynamics. It has to do with NOx emissions that come from the freeways. It has to do with ammonia emissions that are in the cattle racing farm. And this, again, it's a peak that's predicted by this model, which is great, but it's also predicted by all the other atmospheric modelings of the area. And it's also one that, very well characterized by measurements and whatnot. So that's pretty good. So here we get a lot of secondary organic. This is, a lot of nitrates. And here we get, some sulfates, and it has to do with chips and airports, but there is also some sources of particulate matter over there. So these are the absolute one. Again, nothing new. We have seen this before. We have seen this in other models. What's interesting here, again, is what's shown in the right hand, which is the model predictions under this FCD scenario that we're getting. And look at that. Check it out. We also get what I think is a significant reduction. So these are not absolute values. This is the delta. In PM 2.5. And it happens, the reductions happen, look at that, in the places where you need it the most. So again, nature wants, kind, to this particular scenario, and that reduction of about 8 or so, it's pretty significant. It's very significant in the levels of PM if we look at the numbers. So even now in this relaxed scenario, with fuel cells, that it keeps the number of cars, but it doesn't change the heavy-duty vehicles. We still see percentage-wise very significant decreases in PM2.5. So that's shown very clearly here. So let's proceed and let's continue our analysis. And you say, well, that looks interesting, but let me add a couple of other sources of hydrogen here in these locations. This is basically petroleum coke gasification, and basically petroleum coke is the bottom of the distillate of petroleum. This is used in ships quite a bit. So let's use that to generate hydrogen, and let's put it, which is dirty technology kind of thing, and let's put them on the basis. So I wanted to sort of show you this, because this sort of goes with the flow that not only you have completed your study, but then you say, let me tweak it a little bit to see how this impacts what I saw before, and all that stuff. So let's do that, and this is basically going to shift from our scenario R to our scenario F that we saw. So we add more fossil fuel for the production of hydrogen, and everything is the same. We are still using hydrogen, we are still using the same number of cars, the same emissions other than that, and everything exactly the same. So this is what we saw before, nothing new here in a few slides ago. So this is our baseline, this is the delta of that, and now these are the new results, the new delta with this these petroleum coke hydrogen sources inland, which are located around here. And look at that. You see this plume here that before you saw some bluish and greenish and dark blues. So you saw a lot of decreases, but now you sort of erase those benefits. And sure, you still get some other benefits over there, but you sort of erase those benefits as far as ozone is concerned. And there's some, ozone recirculation issues that bring, a couple of ppm of ozone higher over here. This is not that they were meeting in the ocean, but sort of a little recirculation that's going on. And so you can see the impact very clearly, looking at beautiful Gaussian plume, the impact of those petroleum coke plants, and actually they were proposed to be done there, and so this were not that we were just making it up and let's put it there. There was an actual plan to put them there, which did not go through, but now you can see why, among other things, of course. So let's. That's as far as ozone is concerned. What about as far as particles? Again, we have our baseline that we have seen many times, and the predictions that we got before for our mostly renewable scenarios, but now we're going to have the new sources of hydrogen over here, and so you still see the major peak reduction, but due to the winds, there is that plume, and that's actually a large plume that you see, that it's not only erasing the benefits that you saw before, but actually putting more particles on that regard. So again, this type of tool sort of combine all the fuel cycle analysis. It combines all the emission development, especially temporally. It does, sort of couple that with the atmospheric chemistry, advection, diffusion, reaction, to try to give you these types of insights that then you can come up and say, well, let me add some stuff here, let me remove some stuff here, to ask what if scenarios. that I think that are very important, not only to understand the dynamics from a scientific point of view, but to give insight to decision makers and as well as to the general public. So I hope that in the last few minutes you get a little flavor of how these atmospheric models are tied up with the energy infrastructure and the fuel needs paradigm shift that we are experiencing right now. And certainly this was sort of like to whet your appetite. We look at one very particular 2050 scenario. We have done hundreds of these. It's not, as I mentioned, thousands of these. And it's certainly not a one-man show. There's many people that have contributed for that. Mostly the Mark Carreras, and the first author is Stephen Romero. Some of you may know him. He's at the White House right now doing some internship. He's doing very well in his career, and my postdoc Mark. And these are the reference. So feel free to send me a little note if you want the PDF of that reference. I'll be happy to that. And certainly there is a whole set of other members in the team that I collaborate. But let me just mention to my colleague Jack Brower and Professor Scott Samuelson over here in the National Field Research Center. And these are some of the partners that we have to do the research and the financial support that's coming from a series of state and federal agencies. So with that, let's close the second part and open the floor for questions. Thank you.